You know, as I was thinking over the last 2 or 3 years about the transition out of ownership of pigs and going into the layer industry, I would often be questioned by friends, why are you making this decision? I remember having a conversation with Fitz where he specifically kind of got in my face. Why would you go from pigs to chickens? And so I would wax eloquent about the volatility of the industry, with disease, market pressures, as opposed to the relative stability of the egg-laying industry. I cannot tell you how full of crap I am. As a young boy, at the age of about 5, I was living on a diversified farm, and my first chore in that farm was the collecting eggs out of the old chicken coop that my mother had, because she had eggs that she would take into town and sell just like many other wives did. That was her grocery money. And so every day I would get this little wire basket and I would waltz out into the chicken coop, and there would be eggs laying in the coops, and I would gather those eggs and haul them up to my mother. And one day I went out there and a chicken was in the coop backwards. And as she stood up, she expelled her egg. And I suddenly realized where those damn things came from. And I went running to my mother and said, "Mom, they crapped those eggs." And she said, after she washed my mouth out with soap, she says, "No, son, they lay them." The point of my story is that little wire basket that I used when I was 5 years old in 1962, I saw at Iowa Cage Free a month ago when I walked into the production barn, and here is a stack of wire baskets. Because in this cage-free farm, we're using wire baskets to pick up eggs that don't get laid in the system. So we're back to the future. That's the reason for my talk. So when you look about where we are today and you look at a modern chicken farm versus an old-style chicken farm, modern egg production really is the confluence of technology, animal husbandry, nutrition, management, all wrapped up into bringing an egg from a quarter of a mile away through a series of transition points into a modern production facility with on-farm breaking and on-farm feed mill production. Well, we'll get into that. It's really a fascinating business. Here are the topics I intend to cover today. I've got essentially 5 topics, but really focused in 2 principal areas. What I want to do today with you is to first demonstrate some of the same kinds of challenges that the egg-laying industry has that we have in the swine industry and how they are adapting to those potential pressures. And number 2, then focus on some of the keys to success and some of the similarities of things that we do to what we do in pork production as well. So let's start off with a little bit about just telling you a little bit about what is today's egg industry, okay? How does it stack up? Well, from those days in 1962, when mamas were all gathering eggs and taking them in, the industry started to change and grow and become more specialized. And in the 1960s and 70s, you started to see 10,000 birdhouses. Then you saw 20,000. Then you saw 50,000 birdhouses. And when each step in growth, there were changes and improvements in technology. But then there became a shift. And that shift caused the egg industry to move closer to the population base because it just made more sense to them at the time. I compare it to the Wendell Murphy effect that hit the swine industries, in the late 70s, early 80s, when Wendell started to do some contracting. And so then suddenly the realities of economics hit, and everyone started to remember that, hey, we can do that too. And number 2, just the sheer transportation costs of shipping feed into those areas as opposed to shipping product out start to hit. And so then in the 1980s and the 1990s, then the production system started to shift back to the Midwest. And clearly Iowa, if you look at the industry layers today, where are they at? Just look at this. In 1995, Iowa had 14 million layers, and now we have 58 million layers. The same economics that touch the swine industry also touch the egg industry. Corn basis, corn flat price, it is cheaper to make an egg in Iowa. Another point I would make is you look at California, they were at 24 million layers in 1995, and they're continuing to decline in production. Tim, I can get you all the slides you want. Good to go. All right. So, let's talk about kind of the trends. So you think about in the mid-1970s, there were 10,000 egg farmers. Well, the same thing that's happening in swine is happening in eggs. In fact, it happened before in eggs than it did in swine. So here's what's going on. In 87, we're down to 2,500 producers. In 2015, there's 175 commercial egg companies that represent 99% of all the eggs in the United States. There are 60 companies with more than 1 million layers. So 17 companies average more than 15. And so I'm currently involved in about just under 30 million layers now. So the consolidation effect that is affecting our industry, I believe will continue to roll through the swine industry as well. So how big is the layer industry? Well, there's 305 million layers in the United States, and there's 315 million people. So Joe, somewhere in the United States there's a chicken running around with your name on it. All right? So the average farm size is about 1.5 million layers, and there's some farms. I mean, at Fremont Farms of Iowa, that farm I showed you there, we started building that farm in 1997 with a high-rise construction. We'll come back to it. We've been almost in a continual state of construction on that farm, and we will finish out that 160-acre parcel with 7.2 million layers. And then we're going to start tearing down the first barns and start all over again. So that farm has been under a continuous state of construction and is going to continue to be under construction. We just don't know what we're going to build yet. Because one of the biggest trends is, what do you build for the future? When you build a barn that's going to be there for 25 or 30 years, when you're going to put up a gestation barn, are you going to use stalls or pens? Or are you going to build cage or cage-free? Oh, one more thing. 91% of the eggs are still produced in cages. 91%. Only 5% currently are in cage-free production. And so when you look at all the branded pressures that are coming right now, there's an expectation of a huge increase in cage-free production. So a little bit about consumers. So of that 300 million layers of production, you get about 229 million cases of eggs produced. So about half of that production goes into the grocery store. Price point purchases right there at the store. Most of what we produce goes into further processing. So that means it goes into cake mixes and pancake batters, hospitals for food service, and only about 4% of what we produce in the United States goes into export. Now that's a significantly different production level or export level compared to where we're at in pigs. And so I think the egg industry in general, because it's a very inexpensive protein, and the bird typically without all the capital investment is easier to raise in countries across the world. And so I don't ever see or foresee that point where egg production will be an important export market as compared to pigs. In terms of per capita consumption, 261 eggs consumed per person per year. So, and that's about right where that one chicken, Joe, that's about where they're at. So, animal welfare issues in the swine industry, obviously with gestation crates, have been an issue. And animal welfare issues in layers have been a huge issue. Probably the biggest single issue that industry has had to deal with for many, many years. In fact, the UEP took a very, very aggressive approach as long ago as 2002. They went out and they did the science and they did the work, and they created their own UEP certified animal welfare program. which determined that 67 square inches was what they needed. They were very, very specific about how much space they needed at the trough, how many waterers per bird, et cetera, how much light. And that seemed to work for a while, but was it enough? And the answer to that is no. As we got into 2015, it really wasn't. In other words, they were hanging on by a thread with our good friends at HSUS. And so HSUS started working through a number of the ballot initiative states. If you look at this particular slide, any state that's in red is a ballot initiative state. And so Prop 2 in California was passed, which made specific requirements in terms of egg production that a lot of egg producers could not meet with the current production standards. If you think about that, then with these large farms that are located in the Midwest in blue, and you look at the states that are starred, that had ballot initiatives, if you go to our operations in Ohio, you'll see this. We'll have a warehouse of packaging material that will be 5 times the size of this room. And every egg that comes out of that farm has to go into a specific package for a specific store. It's a graded egg operation. And to try to meet the requirements of all of these different ballot initiatives, you can't just change one barn because all these eggs are just coming in together. And so it's a huge structural problem for the industry to try to figure out how you're going to meet the expectations of that customer. And so UEP decided to adjust to that by going down the road of the ill-fated agreement and the legislative agreement with HSUS. I, for one, was against that and voted against it when I had the opportunity, but that's the decision they made, and we all know what happened with that. What's going on today instead is the brands are really driving the change to cage-free. That means HSUS in the past year, when HighPath AI hit, all egg prices went up, right? So they go around to the brands and say, look, you're paying the same for cage-free as cage. They're all expensive now. So it's easy to make an announcement. So how at the price point, the brands are doing it to protect their name. They're including that egg in a product, whether it's a McDonald's sandwich, the egg is only a certain portion of that egg, or if it's Hellmann's mayonnaise, they're doing it because they're a European company. Unilever owns them, and then they've already kind of gone through the cage-free transformation in Europe, and they just made the decision, that's the way we're going to do it. And so the difference that we see here is brands are working to protect their image. The question will be, will consumers at the actual store make that point of purchase decision, especially next year when caged eggs are going to be relatively cheap compared to cage-free. Now at that price point, so at Walmart and Safeway and Kroger, will they actually pay for it is the question. So what is the difference between cages and cage-free? I've used a lot of different definitions, and I thought I would give you just kind of a brief overview of what those systems are. So when you look at conventional cage production, you've got the birds are up on wire. They have typically 6 to 7 birds in a cage, and the feed is in a trough, and the manure today is actually removed from underneath that wire with a manure belt. Okay? And so if you look at this particular farm, on the right-hand side, you can see the barns are taller and skinnier. And those barns are high-rise barns. So those were 2-story cage productions where the manure would just drop through to the bottom. So the ground floor is manure storage, and the birds are up on the second floor, and you let gravity take care of the manure, and you remove it on an annual basis. The barns that are on the left-hand side are the belt battery cages. Manure is removed from the barn on a daily basis on those belts, and so the barns that are at the end, the big wider barns, those are strictly nothing but manure storage. And what we've seen in those barns, when the manure is removed, we have lower ammonia levels, better production. So here's what it looks like. This is a shot looking down the alleyway of a belt battery caged barn. And look at that concrete floor. Now, one could say, well, you cleaned that floor up because it was for this picture. And I would tell you that you could walk in there with this suit on every day, and it would look like that. And you would come out, you'd have a little dust on you. You'd have just a little odor of a chicken, but it's not like you would really notice it. The eggs come out. There are actually 2 floors. So you've got you're either 3 or 4 high in these kind of configurations, and they come to the end of the barn, and they go through what looks like an elevator is called a de-escalator. And those eggs are then dropped down to a belt. Then they take a belt transfer all the way up into the production room. And so this is the shot of the eggs as they're going into the processing plant. So the eggs are pre-washed. You can see that jet of water there. That's all that is to kind of get the eggs wet to remove any dirt and matter that would be on the eggs. Then the next step is a candling station. So these large processing plants, these are USDA inspected on the farm plants. And so these guys, what she's doing there is she's picking up an egg that was dirty, and she is setting it in the tray to recycle that egg back around and be rewashed again. She's also looking for bloods. Those would be removed at that point. The next step, this is a dryer station. So now that this is the washer section. So we've gone through the blood and the candling. Now we're going to wash the eggs. And then the next step is where the eggs are actually broken, which I don't have a good shot of that to show you. I wish I could. After going through being broken, the eggs are then homogenized, and we store them in large stainless steel tanks, and we ship out liquid egg then that goes to pasteurization. So that's the end of the step for us. Pasteurized egg, and the USDA inspector will seal every tank, load it, and do the permit paperwork on it. So the next step in that evolution then is called the enriched colony cage. So you might hear the term enriched, or you might hear the term enrichable, which simply means that enrichable, they didn't put all the perches in. So you have more space, the cages are bigger, so now instead of having 6 or 7 birds, you have 60 birds in a cage, and instead of 67 square inches, they have 116 square inches. So they have more space, they're taller, and they have these perches. They typically would have a scratch pad for the bird to go out and, scratch and be able to exhibit normal chicken type of behavior. And then they have a little more space in terms of the feed trough as well. But in terms of handling the eggs come out just the same. The birds are always up on wire. And so this is called the enriched colony production. And really the industry was kind of working in this direction for a long time until the brand thing here over the last year came out. And this is not going to be, I think, the direction that the industry is going to go. But I think it should have been from a scientific. So if you look at how that lays out, again, you can see that the birds are still on wire. And that's really important because you stop that fecal-oral transmission. I mean, why did we put chickens on wire to begin with? Because of internal parasites, coccidiosis, and bacterial diseases. And you know what we're seeing in cage-free right now? We're seeing internal parasites, coccidiosis, and I'm just waiting for the bacterials to come. All right? Cage-free production, then, is the next step in that evolution. And in that particular case, I'm going to use the term aviary with you. So what does aviary mean? Well, a floor bird and an aviary are 2 separate things. If you think about a floor bird, it's kind of like a nursery house. So you've got double L flooring or plastic flooring, and along one wall you'll have nest boxes for the birds, and you might have a feed trough over here in the other side of the building, and it's just kind of a wide open building. An aviary system is kind of like a multi-tiered house, like a split level house. At one level, you'll see here, the bottom level will have feed and water, okay? And then the middle level oftentimes will have a nesting box or a perch area. And these birds are hopping and flipping and flying up and down and all over the place. And there are many different styles of cage-free aviary systems right now. And I think the reason that there is because no one's come up with the single best system yet. So this is an aerial shot of Iowa Cage Free. This is an operation I took CEO of in January. And this has big Dutchman equipment in it. Scanlon, are you here today? Scanlon Daniels? I took him in there one time. So the big Dutchman equipment is similar to what we just showed you there. And if you look at the photograph on the left, and you see that wire there that is sitting at an angle, that's a door. And that's important because the way we manage these birds is like this. Let's start at 5 o'clock in the morning. The birds are all inside the system and the door is shut. All right? And as light comes on, that's what stimulates the bird to lay its egg. Feed comes along, we feed the bird. And so we would keep that bird in the system so that they would be close to the nest box. They lay their eggs, they eat, and as soon as they eat, they defecate. So they're sitting on top of that manure belt. So 95 to 100% of your manure is captured on the belt. And then about 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, the door would open, and now the birds come out, and they're running around all day until dusk. And then what happens is, as we dim the house lights, a rope light comes on. You know those rope lights that are in the bars that attract us to go drink at night? Well, we use those same rope lights that instead of saying Bud Light, come here and drink, these are lights that will actually, the chicken is drawn towards that light. So we dim the house lights, the rope lights come on, and the birds come in and they roost then for the night and the door shuts. It's amazing how you can train the birds to do that. All right? But here's the problem. Went through an audit. Customer audit said, well, you're closing the doors on the birds at night. I said, yeah, that's what we do. That's what we used to. When I was a kid, we'd close the birds so that the predators would not come in and kill our chickens. And they said, we don't like that. So now the new systems that we're putting in are like this. There are no doors. So this is a Vaccination system. And you can see now that there are no doors. These birds are running around all over the place. So this is the Vaccination system that we're doing. And in fact, what we're doing with this particular slide doesn't show it, but we're remodeling old 2-story high-rises into double cage-free systems. So we've got cage-free down, cage-free up, and we're building manure storage out the back. The problem is that manure doesn't necessarily get on the belt. The birds don't always read the manual. And so we have scraper systems that are underneath the manure belts, little V scrapers. So they're about every 50 feet in the barn, and those barns are 700 feet long. So these little 50-foot scrapers will pull this way, and then they will fold up, and it will come back, and it just continues to work that manure that's on the floor out of the barn. It doesn't work that well. We have to hire people to come in with scoop shovels to scoop manure by hand onto the manure belt. You know what we found out was the best way to do it? Snow blowers. Take a snow blower, just run, and you don't have to do the whole floor because you just take one path, just like with the scraper, and then over the next 24 hours, the birds will kind of even things out. And so you just we're running snow blowers. It's incredibly stupid. So this is a picture of Iowa Cage Free at Clearfield, which is just south of Creston. Right now we have about 700,000 birds there, and we're putting $32 million into it this summer to add another 600,000 birds, 700,000 birds. Yeah, this is our shot. So we're going to show you a little video of what it looks like. If you could, Beth. Whoop. There you go. see the little red covers? Those are the nest boxes, all right? And that's where the birds will go in and lay their eggs. And that press board that she's standing on, that press board is actually covering the egg belt. So once they go into the nest box, and go ahead and stop, you see what's there on the floor? There's 2 eggs laying there, isn't there? The damn chickens don't always read the book. We have to take about 3,000 eggs a day out of each one of these barns. Someone has to stand there and pick them up and put them on the egg belt. It is incredibly labor intensive. Think about that. Your job is to do 2 things. Pick up eggs and make sure you've found the dead chickens. Try to motivate somebody to do that all day. That is a struggle. Go ahead, Beth. Finish. So you can see that's the feed trough that you're seeing in the picture. You see those lights that are very, very bright in the back? Those are the system lights that are going to turn on at night to draw the birds up when the house lights are going down. You're looking at that plastic flooring. The manure belt is directly underneath. And so we would move about, in the wintertime, we take about 50% out a day, and in the summer, or 30% out. In the wintertime, it's about 50. That scraper system I talked about is underneath that manure belt, and you can't see it in this particular picture. But that's what cage-free looks like. If you go to the ABMA website, you'll see this chart. Okay, so which one is better? All right? Colony cages, traditional cages, cage-free. I mean, there was a study done at Michigan that looked at all the different systems. All right? And so you have conventional cages on the left. The furnished cages were, when they say small, medium, large, they were having different sizes of how many birds were actually in each cage. And then you have the non-cage barn and the cage-free. And they looked at it, based on mortality, pecking order, all kinds of different analysis of individual welfare issues. And from my perspective, that's where the enriched colony cage really looked like it was the right thing to do. I would suggest that the birds do need that space, and I would suggest that that would still protect the fecal-oral transmission of disease and parasites that we worry about. But unfortunately, the industry is going to build cage-free. So what are the costs? Just to give you a feeling for what does it mean to produce a cage-free egg? Well, in the 1990s, when we were building high-rise barns, we could build those barns for about $16 a chicken, all in capital expense. When we went to the belt battery cages that we talked about, we were about $23, but the productivity improvements pretty much paid for that increase in cost, I would tell you. They really did improve in terms of their productivity. Cage-free, on the other hand, is about $42. And I'm just listing labor here because that's an easy one to pick on, but in a cage system, 2 cents is kind of the old industry standard per dozen. Those costs are per dozen. And when we talk about the Big Dutchman system that we have in Goldfield, we're about a nickel to do that labor because there still is a lot more. You still have what we call system eggs in that system. They tend to roll out and someone has to pick them up and do this all day. But the ones at Clearfield, where we have the birds are out all the time, we're right now at 7 cents a dozen, and we're struggling to get that. We're still working to try to develop our standard operating procedures to train the birds better in terms of how they lay their eggs. I mean, it is a training process, not only for us to learn how to do it, but for the birds to learn how to do it. So, that's welfare. Another issue that we fight in the industry is the egg safety rule. So we've all heard of Salmonella enteritis, and that is a kind of an interesting process that we have to go through. So first of all, we have to ensure that we are testing for Salmonella. So when birds arrive, they are tested, the chick paper, bacterial tests are done on that material. Then we will do environmental tests at 14 to 16 weeks of age, which would be right about the time that the pullets are leaving the farm or right before they would move into the layer house. And what they do is either put on the booties and you're walking in booties through the manure, or you're using drag swabs, just like 4x4s on the manure belts. And those you have to do. I'm not going to give you the exact protocols because I have people that do that, but we send that into Iowa State, and you have to be negative for Salmonella enteritidis. And of course, there are strategic biosecurity practices that you have to follow. And if you do have a positive, that's a problem. Is Dale Polson in the room? I put this slide in just for Dale, okay? Because we all know how Dale loves these big boxes. But the point is that you have to do your environmental testing, and at the specified times that we've talked about. And if you have a positive, then you go into this whole process. Eggs have to be diverted to pasteurization. You go through monthly egg testing procedures, and you have to get 4 negative tests in a row before they can be released. And of course, you've got to go through the whole clean and disinfect process. So that is a pretty significant issue in the egg industry today that we are working with. You have to have a written SE prevention program with documentation that the pullets were monitored. You have to make sure that you have compliance documents and SOPs for biosecurity, rodent, pest control, cleaning, refrigeration, environmental and egg testing, and all those things. We have to do that every day. And the swine industry, I think, is continuing to move in that way as well. Let's talk just briefly about audits. At Fremont Farms of Iowa, I think we go through 4 different audits. All right? You know, we have the American Humane Certified audit that we have to go through. So they're looking at welfare-related issues. And United Egg Producers, they have their own audit process, right? The 60 square inch and the UEP certified program. We also have to go through an American Bakery Institute audit so that our products, remember the further processing that I talked about? We have to go through a Bakery Institute audit. And other specific customers will come in and do their own specific customer audits. It is a nightmare for the egg industry. And so I applaud the National Pork Board and the packers going through their process as best they could to have a, quote, unified audit. The trick will be to try to hold everybody to that same standard, because there's always this creeping incrementalism that can occur where if I can just show one thing better than my competitor, then I'm going to be able to sell more product. And so I would admonish everyone in this room that has any influence over that process to try to hold everybody to one standardized audit, because this is a nightmare for us, just from a recording process and a cost. So the next thing I'd like to speak about is pullet development. So, first of all, I've talked about all these different cage systems. You can't just grow a pullet in a pen and make it go into whatever system you work. It won't work that way. If each of these individual systems, you have to actually have the same kind of developing system in order to be successful. So that capital cost of $42, now add on the pullets. So Vaccination has Vaccination equipment, Big Dutchman has Big Dutchman equipment, so that they're used to using the same feed and water, all right, because the birds have to be trained to do it. Number 2, one of the great things about the egg industry is the fact that they have an egg. The shell is a wonderful thing. Protects against a lot of diseases. You know, you talk about filtration. Highline was filtering bird farms 30 years ago, maybe 25. The eggs are hatched at the hatchery. They are shipped to our pullet growing farms in HEPA filtered trucks. And we have a 22-step checklist on every pullet growing group. So there are 8 specific vaccination steps that occur. We have 5 different nursery diet changes that occur. There are 14 different management checkpoints that we look at. in terms of lighting, intensity of lighting, and every day feed and water is monitored both at the pullets and at the layer sites, and we have specific checkpoints to look at their growth and development. So here is some examples of some of the vaccination technologies that are used in egg laying. This is called, this is a vaccination and debeaking piece of equipment made by a company called Novatech. And so the very, very first day that this chicken is born, the chicken is placed in this automatic vaccination machine, and they use an infrared burner to debeak the top of the beak, and the bird then is vaccinated for Merrick's and either ILT or IBV, depending on which one you choose. And then they are placed into nest boxes, and they receive a second vaccination, which occurs as a spray vaccination. So each of these boxes will always have 100 pullets in these boxes. That's the way they come, and they slide these into vans, and these vans are all HEPA filtered, and then they will be transmitted to the farm, and then each 100 birds will be placed into a section of the pullet growing facility. Besides spray vaccines, you will note in the bottom photograph an eye drop vaccine. So I had one farm, Cedar Valley Egg Farm, had a problem with MG, Mycoplasma gallisepticum. And so in that particular farm, we would eye drop vaccine those birds on arrival at the farm because it was a modified live MG vaccine, and it worked better than some of the other traditional vaccines. And so one of the interesting things is that from a vaccine technology, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of choice of products, and there's because there are also fewer bacterial diseases that we face. Most of what we face are viral. Wing web vaccination, fowl pox. You guys remember fowl pox? So we handle the birds as a day-old chick, and then we probably won't physically handle the bird until 8 to 12 weeks of age when we administer fowl pox in the wing web. And oftentimes we will give an E. coli vaccination as an injection at that point. So they probably had 2 or 3 oral vaccinations up to that point, and then they will have an intramuscular in the chest, in the breast muscle vaccination. And of course, any revaccinations that may occur, this is kind of an interesting thing. You see that on the left, you'll see that's in a caged barn. That's how we'll spray vaccinate if we're going to revaccinate birds. Like with ILT, I've had an ILT break. If you remember laryngotracheitis, it's like IBR in cattle. Nels was talking earlier about revaccination. I've had farms where we had to revaccinate for ILT, and we did it using a lawn sprayer, essentially. So there's all kinds of different ways to vaccinate chickens. Another thing that we do with our pullets is we really closely monitor their growth. So from starting at about the 3rd week of age, every week we weigh 100 pullets, and we are looking at and measuring their growth. So we're running this graph. That's the graph of the 100 birds that were weighed that particular week, and we're comparing that against a standard. And they don't, for some reason, the egg industry doesn't necessarily use real statistics. What they do is they take the average weight of the bird, and they look at 10% either side. They just pick 10%. They don't pick a standard deviation. It's close, and I think maybe for the on-farm guys, that's close enough. And so they look at who's outside of that, and they say, well, how much is anything that's within that 20% range is considered a uniform pullet. Anything outside that range is not uniform. So in this particular example, if you look at the right-hand side, I think, my eyes aren't very good, but I think our mean was 1.95 pounds on that weight, and we had 91% uniformity. And that's pretty close to what we're shooting for in our operations right now, is to have at least 90% uniformity and mortalities of less than 4%. The truth is, when we went to infrared debeaking, as opposed to 7-day-old debeaking, and the reason that we did it was that's one less handling step, and when high-path AI hit, everybody was trying to figure out ways not to bring more crews onto their farms. So we went to more infrared debeaking. What we've seen with that particular step is that it can be problematic if it's too deep, especially if you have some variability in size of your chicks. So take, for instance, you have a young flock of breeders, you'll have smaller eggs and smaller chicks in those first few weeks. Their heads are smaller. You put them in the Novatech machine, and it's supposed to be one size fits all, but the chicken isn't the same size. So it will tend to debeak a little bit further back. So now you've given a chick that's smaller a more aggressive debeaking, and it affects their ability to eat and drink. So we've seen higher mortalities in that situation. So that's, am I there? I'm good? All right. That's a little bit about what we're doing in the egg industry today. We are continuing to try to measure everything. I talked about the pullets. I didn't really talk about layers today because I knew I was going to run out of time. But I would say this. We measure our feed consumption, our production, our water consumption every single day. We know what those birds are eating every single day. That information is transmitted to the farm manager. It's transmitted to the nutritionist so that we know that they are on track. And if they're not on track, we're out there looking to see why. We are an industry that is in transition in terms of the issues that we fight. We are looking at animal welfare related issues. We are trying to produce a product that the consumer says that they think they want. And we're trying to do it in the best, most welfare-friendly fashion that we can, and yet still do it in a cost-effective way. So with that, I thank you.